Hello, everyone. Today we study global human resource management. This chapter looks at how international companies manage their people around the world. We'll look at how companies pay employees in different countries. We'll look at how companies build a diverse workforce. And we'll look at how companies work with the labor unions across borders. We'll use real company examples throughout, including McDonald's and Sodexo. Let's begin. Here are our learning objectives for today. First, we'll understand how global companies design their compensation strategy across many different countries. Second, we'll understand how companies pay expatriates, meaning employees sent abroad to work in a foreign country. Third, we'll understand why a diverse global workforce matters and what steps companies take to build one. Fourth, we'll understand the concerns that organized labor, meaning labor unions, have about multinational companies. Finally, we'll understand how shifting immigration policy around the world is changing global HR strategy today. Our first module looks at global compensation strategy. This means how a company decides what to pay employees who work in many different countries. We'll use McDonald's as our main example. Let's look at a detailed real-world case. McDonald's had grown to more than 400,000 managers and senior staff employees spread across 118 countries. Like many companies that expand into so many corners of the world, McDonald's found that its compensation program had become decentralized and inconsistent from country to country. McDonald's executive of worldwide human resource identified a clear need. The company needed one consistent global HR strategy in order to attract and retain successful employees everywhere it operates. So how did McDonald's actually design this new system? One key element involves the corporate head office giving local country managers a menu of business principles to focus on each year. These principles cover areas such as customer service, marketing, and restaurant re-imaging. Each country manager then picks 3 to 5 of these areas to focus on for success in their own local market. For example, if France is introducing a new menu item, its managers might build business targets specifically around that launch. Local human resource managers then submit their business cases and targets to senior executives and headquarters for formal approval. This creates a system that's globally consistent in structure, but locally flexible in content. The part of the annual incentive at McDonald's is based on individual performance. The company introduced global guidelines suggesting that 20% of employees receive the highest performance rating, 70% receive the middle rating, and 10% receive the bottom rating. Notice the word guidelines, not forced rules. By offering guidelines rather than a strict forced ranking system, McDonald's hopes to encourage real differentiation in performance evaluation, while still allowing some local flexibility for each country's own culture and workforce. This is a good example of a balance every global company must strike between having one consistent worldwide standard and respecting real local differences. What were the actual result of this new approach at McDonald's? By providing clear principles and guidelines from headquarters while still allowing local country managers to customize their compensation programs for local market conditions. McDonald's reports it has seen a real reduction in employee turnover. The company's own internal surveys suggest that more employees now believe their compensation is fair and that it genuinely reflects local market conditions where they work. In McDonald's own words, its benefits and compensation program is designed to attract, retain, and engage talented people who will deliver strong performance and help the company achieve its business goals. This case shows how thoughtful HR design can directly support a company's broader business strategy. McDonald's is not alone in moving forward global compensation standards. A survey by Mercer Management Consulting found that 85% of companies surveyed now have a global compensation strategy in place. Another survey found that 2/3 of multinational companies now exercise central control over the benefit plans they offer in different countries. However, it is important to note a limit to this trend. Except for a relatively small group of internationally mobile executives, base pay in most firms is still set according to local market conditions, not one single global number. This market sense, since the cost of living and market wage levels vary enormously from country to country. The international cadre means a core group of executives who move around the world together as part of the company's global leadership team. So you can consider it as like a top leadership team. Should every member of this international cadre be paid the same salary and receive the same incentive pay, no matter which country they come from? For a company based in the United States, equalizing pay would usually mean raising the compensation of foreign nationals up to US levels, which can be very, very expensive. But if the firm does not equalize pay, this can create real resentment among foreign nationals working closely alongside US colleagues who may be earning more for the same work. If a firm is serious about building a genuinely unified international executive team, it may eventually need to pay the same basic salary regardless of country of origin or assignment. However, this practice is still not widespread today because this has both pros and cons. Our second module focuses specifically on expatriate pay. An expatriate is an employee who's sent by their company to live and work in a foreign country for an extended assignment. Paying expatriates fairly is a complex challenge, and companies have developed a standard approach to solve it. Let's take a look at it. The most common approach to expatriate pay is called the balance sheet approach. According to a survey by organizational resources counselors, about 80% of the 781 companies surveyed use this exact approach. The core idea is simple. The balance sheet approach equalizes purchasing power across countries so that an expatriate can enjoy roughly the same standard of living in their foreign posting that they enjoyed back home. On top of that baseline, the approach also provides a financial incentive, sometimes called a premium, to reward the employee for accepting the overseas assignment in the first place. Let's take a look at how this balance sheet is structured. This slide shows the balance sheet approach in visual form. Read it as 4 columns, moving from left to right. The first column represents the employee's home country salary, broken into income taxes, housing, goods and services, and reserve, meaning saving and pension contribution. The second column represents the actual costs of assignment location, using the same 4 categories. The third column shows what it would cost to give the expatriate the same purchasing power and standard of living they had at home, translated into new location. The fourth column adds premium and incentives on top, the extra rewards for accepting the assignment. The whole point of this balance sheet is captured in its name. It tries to keep the expatriates' overall financial position in balance with what they had at home, while adding a little something extra as a reward. Let's put real number behind the diagram. We just looked at the diagram with the 4 columns. Imagine a U.S. manager earning $120,000 a year. Okay, $120,000 a year, who's being sent on assignment to Tokyo. Start with the first column, the home country salary. If this person stayed in the U.S., that 120,000 would roughly break down into like 24,000 in income taxes, 18,000 for housing, 36,000 for goods and services, and 42 going into reserve, like savings and retirement contributions. That's our baseline. So this is what a comfortable, typical life on this salary looks like at home. Now move to the second column. Tokyo is expensive. If we take those same 4 categories and reprice them using Tokyo's cost of living, housing running into 2.25 times the US cost is very expensive, and the goods and services about 1.5 times. Housing jumped to $39,600, and the goods and services to $50,400. Tax goes slightly up to $26,400 because Tokyo's marginal rate is a bit higher. Reserve stays flat at $42,000 because the saving and retirement contributions don't really change just because you moved, right? That's a fixed obligation, not a cost of living. Adding all together and simply maintaining the same lifestyle in Tokyo costs $158,400, over $38,000 more than at home. The third column, home country equivalent, is where the company steps in. This is the amount the company commits to fund so the employee doesn't lose purchasing power just by accepting the assignment. In this example, it matches the column 2. Exactly, the company absorbs the entire cost gap. In practice, this is often done through tax equalization. The employee is only charged what they would have paid in the US tax, which is $24,000. And the company quietly picks up the extra 2,400 in Tokyo tax on their behalf. Either way, the employees ends up financially whole. Finally, column 4 as the actual incentive for taking the assignment. In this case, an 18,000 mobility and hardship premium. Notice where it lands, not in housing, not in goods and services, but in reserve. That's deliberate. This money isn't meant to cover cost of living. It's a genuine bonus the employee can save or spend at the discretion. So the total package comes to $176,400. $158,400 to stay financially even with a home, plus $18,000 as a true reward for going. That's the balance sheet approach in action. And this is a example. It's not really about paying expatriates more. It's about making sure they're not worse off. So make it balanced. Then layering a clear, feasible incentive on top as a reserve. Expatriate compensation package is made up of 5 components: base salary, a foreign service premium, various allowances, tax differentials, and benefits. This all adds up quickly. In fact, an expatriate total compensation package may cost the company up to 3 times what a similar employee would cost in a home country posting. Because expatriates are so expensive, many firms have tried to reduce how often they use them. However, this is not always possible, especially for firms pursuing certain staffing strategies that require sending home country or third country nationals abroad. Let's talk through each of these 5 components in more detail. First one, base salary. An expatriate's base salary is normally set within the same range as the salary for the similar position back in their home country. It's worth noting an important detail here. While the expatriate keeps roughly their home country salary level, foreign nationals working in the same location do not necessarily receive the same pay. Developed nations such as Germany or the United States often pay higher base salary than comparable positions in developing or less developed countries. The base salary itself is normally paid in either the home country currency or the local currency of the assignment location, depending on the company's policy and the employee's preference. The second component is the foreign service premium. This is extra pay the expatriate receives simply for accepting a foreign posting. It's meant as an inducement to accept the assignment in the first place. It compensates the employee for having to live in an unfamiliar country, often far away from family and friends, for having to navigate a new culture, language, and for having to adapt to unfamiliar work habits and practices. Most firms pay this premium as a percentage of base salary, typically ranging from 10 to 30% after tax, with 16% being the average premium across companies. The third component covers 4 types of allowance. A hardship allowance is paid when the expatriate is sent to a difficult location. one where basic amenities like healthcare, schools, and retail stores are seriously lacking by home country standards. A housing allowance ensuring a expatriate can afford housing of similar quality abroad as they had at home. In very expensive cities like London or Tokyo, this allowance can be substantial, as much as 10 to 30% of the expatriate's total compensation package. The cost of living allowance ensures the expatriate maintain the same overall standard of living in their foreign posting. And an education allowance ensures the expatriate's children receive adequate schooling by home country standards, which sometimes means paying for private school if local public schools are not considered suitable. The fourth compensation is taxation, which can get complicated quickly unless the host country has a reciprocal tax treaty with the expatriate's home country. The expatriates may end up owing income tax to both governments at once. When no such treaty is in force, the firm typically steps in and pays the expatriate's income tax in the host country directly, so the employee is not personally burdened by double taxation. In addition, firms normally make up the difference whenever a higher host country income tax rate would otherwise reduce the expatriate's take-home pay. The goal, consistent with the whole balance sheet approach, is to make sure taxes never leave the expatriate financially worse off than they would have been at home. The fifth and financial component is benefit. Many firms ensure their expatriates keep the same level of medical and pension benefits abroad that they had at home. This can be generally costly for the company because certain benefits that are tax deductible in the home country may not be tax deductible once the employee is working abroad. Adding up all five components, base salary, the foreign service premium, allowances, tax differentials, and benefits, an expatriate's total compensation package can cost the firm up to 3 times what the same role would cost if filled by someone based at home. This very high cost is exactly why many companies actively try to limit how many expatriates they use, and instead try to hire and develop local talent wherever possible. Our third module shifts to a very different topic, building a diverse global workforce. We'll look at the evidence connecting diversity to stronger financial performance, the reason why diversity helps a company, and detailed real-world example from company Sodexo. Let's start with the evidence. A diverse workforce is one with a strong mix of genders and where cultural and ethnic minority groups are well presented. Research consistently links workforce diversity to stronger financial performance. One study by McKinsey and company found that companies in the top quartile of gender and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above their national industry median. Another study found that companies with the strongest record of promoting women into the executive suite outperformed their industry norms, with a return on assets 18% higher than their peers. These are large, meaningful differences differences, and they help explain why so many global companies now treat diversity as a genuine business priority, not just a compliance requirement. There are 5 reasons why a diverse workforce tend to improve company performance. First, diverse talent brings insight into the needs of diverse customer base. Insight that a workforce made up of just one race or gender may simply miss. Different life experiences lead to different perspectives, which can spark more creative problem solving. And second, a company with a homogeneous workforce is underutilizing the talent available among women and minority ethnic groups. As a result, it weakens its overall human capital. Third, diverse customers often appreciate interacting with employees who understand their needs, tastes, and preferences firsthand. Fourth, a diverse workforce can improve a company's brand image, creating a virtuous circle that helps attract even more top talent. Fifth, there's evidence that diversity increases employee satisfaction, productivity, especially once minority representation passes about 15% of the workforce. Below the level, diversity efforts can feel like only a token gesture with weaker results. Despite this strong evidence, the consulting firm found that many companies still have a long way to go. Mercer, the consulting company, studied gender diversity across 164 companies in 28 different countries. It found that women continued to be underrepresented at every level of the labor force worldwide. Looking especially at senior executive roles, only 24% were women in North America, 18% in Europe, and just 12% in Latin America. These numbers make clear that despite growing awareness of the benefits of diversity, real progress toward the gender balance in senior leadership remains slow and uneven across different regions of the world. The other research also revealed important patterns. The imbalance between men and women tends to grow larger the higher up in the organization you look. For the average global organizations, 36% of lower level managers were women, but that share drops to 26% among senior managers and drops again to just 19% among company executives. This pattern is sometimes described as a leaking pipeline. Women enter management in reasonable numbers, but a smaller and smaller share make it to each higher level of leadership. Understanding this pattern is the first step for any company trying to close the gap. Building a diverse workforce is generally difficult, especially for an international company, since the very definition of culture or ethnic minority group can vary from country to country, as can broader attitudes toward women in the workforce. Still, clear steps. We have clear steps that international business can take. First, senior level executives must create a clear value proposition, explaining exactly why building a diverse and inclusive culture benefits the company. Second, leaders should set clear goals, not rigid quotas, and constantly measure progress toward those goals over time. Third, companies must hold managers accountable for reaching diversity goals and reward the ones who succeed. Fourth, senior management must lead by example, visibly hiring and promoting people from diversity backgrounds themselves, not just announcing policies from a distance. Diversity workshops are a common tool companies use to educate employees at every level about the value of building a more inclusive workforce. A key goal of these workshops is overcoming subconscious bias and stereotyping that can lead to discrimination. Several specific techniques have proven effective. Role playing lets employees who are not from a minority group personally experience what bias feels like. Reminding people about the risk of bias right before the key moment, such as performance reviews, have also been shown to help. Helping people focus on genuine individual differences rather than group stereotype is another useful technique. In one interesting experiment, French students initially discriminated against potential employees with Arabian names. But this discrimination stopped once the students were simply asked to describe the differences between photos, an exercise that made their own subconscious bias visible to themselves. Let's look at a detailed real-world diversity case. A company, Sodexo. Sodexo was founded in France in 1966, and it's one of the world's leading provider of quality of life services, including food service, facilities management, and employee benefits. Today, Sodexo employs 425,000 people across 80 countries, serves 75 million customers every single day, and generates more than $23 billion in annual revenue. Sodexo is especially well known for its deep, sustained commitment to building a globally diverse workforce. And it has been ranked in the top 10% of the companies for workforce diversity multiple years in a row. Sodexo focuses its diversity efforts on 5 key areas: generations, sexual orientation, disabilities, culture and origin, and gender. The company backs this focus with real numbers. Globally, Sodexo's board of directors is 50% female. It's an amazing percentage. The company's former CEO set a target for 40% of all senior leaders to be women by 2025. And about 60% of Sodexo's managers are people of color. These are ambitious, measurable targets, not vague statement of good intention, which is exactly the kind of accountability that we should follow. How does Sodexo actually organize this work across 80 different countries? Each country reports to a regional diversity leadership council covering regions like North America, Europe, and South America, each chaired by that region's CEO. Sodexo deliberately allows each country to build its own local diversity initiatives from the group up, since a top-down approach often gets rejected locally. At the same time, a cross-market diversity council exists to make sure good ideas can still be shared across the whole company. Most importantly, Sodexo ties real money to diversity performance. 25% of the annual bonus for executive team members and 10 to 15% of the bonus for the senior and mid-level managers. is directly connected to how well they perform against diversity scorecard metrics. This is a powerful example of turning stated values into measurable, incentivized management practice. Our fourth module shifts to international labor relations. This covers how multinational companies interact with organized labor, meaning labor unions, across different countries. We'll look at what worries unions about multinational companies, how unions have tried to respond, and how companies actually manage these relations. Labor unions try to win better pay, greater job security, and better working conditions through collective bargaining with the management. Their main source of power is the credible threat to disrupt production through a strike or another form of work protest. But this threat only works if management has no real alternative to using union labor. And this is exactly where multinational companies gain an advantage. The domestic union's biggest concern about the multinational firm is that the company can counter union bargaining power with the power to simply move production to another country instead. Ford gave us a clear real-world example. Ford clearly threatened Britain unions with a plan to shift manufacturing to continental Europe, not British. Unless British workers abandoned restrictive work rules and showed more restraint in wage negotiations and reduced the strikes and other work disruptions. Organized labor has two more major concerns about multinational companies. First, unions worry that international business will keep its highly skilled tasks in the home country, sending only low-skilled tasks abroad to foreign plants. This makes it much easier for the company to switch production between locations whenever it wants, which further reduce union bargaining power. Second, unions worry when a multinational firm tries to import its own home country employment practices and contracts into a new country. This concern has come to repeatedly with the Japanese multinationals exporting their particular style of labor relations abroad. Many Japanese auto plants in the United States remain non-unionized to these days, which has been a source of ongoing frustration for the United Auto Workers Union, since it means shrinking union influence across the border auto industry. Unions do not always lose these battles. A well-documented example involves General Motors and its operations in Germany. GM wants to integrate and consolidate its European manufacturing operations in the most efficient possible way, which usually means concentrating production in fewer, larger plants. But to gain peace with the powerful German metal workers union, GM agreed not to fully integrate and consolidate its operations in this way. Instead, GM made substantial new investments in Germany, deliberately matching its investment levels in Austria and Spain at the direct demand of the German unions. This example shows an organized labor, when strong enough, can generally constrain a multinational company's ability to pursue the most efficient possible global strategy. Facing the Growing bargaining power of multinational corporations, organized labor has tried the three main strategies in response. First, unions have tried to establish international labor organizations to coordinate action across countries. Second, they have lobbied for national legislation that would restrict multinationals. Third, they have sought international regulations of multinationals through bodies such as the United Nations. Overall, these efforts have not been very successful. Let's look more closely at why, starting with the International Trade Secretariats. In 1960s, organized labor began building international trade secretariats, mean to provide worldwide links between national unions in the same industry. The long-term goal was to bargain transnationally with the multinational firms, coordinating pressure across many countries at once. In theory, this could have worked well. Ford's threat to shift production out of Great Britain would have been far less credible if unions across different European countries had united to oppose it together. In practice, these secretariats have had virtually no real success, even though national unions may generally want to cooperate. They also compete with each other to attract investment and therefore jobs for their own members. A clear example involves Nissan. One reason Nissan chose to build its European production facilities in Great Britain rather than in Spain was that Britain unions agreed to greater concessions than Spanish unions were willing to offer. Beyond simple job competition, there's a deeper reason cooperation among unions is so difficult. Trade unions developed completely independently in each country, so their structure and their underlying ideology vary widely from nation to nation. In Great Britain, France, and Italy, many unions have historically been controlled by left-wing socialists who see collective bargaining through the lens of class conflict between workers and owners. In contrast, most union leaders in Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and Switzerland tend to be far more politically moderate. This ideological gap creates very different views about what role a union should play in society and how it should approach multinational companies, making genuine international cooperation extremely difficult to achieve in practice. How do international business actually organize their labor relations function? The central question is the degree to which this activity is centralized to decentralized. Historically, most international businesses decentralize labor relations to their foreign subsidiaries since labor laws, union power, and bargaining styles varied so much from country to country. It made sense to let local managers handle local realities. However, the trend today is moving toward greater centralized control. Rising competitive pressure across almost every industry has made cost control more important than ever. And since labor costs make up such a large share of total costs, some firms are now directly using the threat of relocating production as a negotiating tactic with the unions, just as Ford did in Europe. Because this kind of tactic involves major investment decisions and potential plant closures, it requires direct input from company headquarters, which naturally increases the level of centralized control over labor relations. Our final module looks at the bigger picture, the broader macro environment shaping global HR today. For decades, globalization made it easier to move talent freely across borders. In recent years, that trend has started to shift. Let's look at what is changing and how companies are responding. In the early chapter of this course, we discussed the possible shift away from globalization, driven partly by trade disputes between major economies, including the world's two largest, the United States and China. Whether this shift will fully persist remains unclear, but it's not a trend that managers can afford to ignore. Perhaps the most impactful part of this broader shift is the rise of anti-immigration sentiment in several countries. Britain's decision to leave the European Union, widely known as Brexit, was partly driven by desire to limit immigration, primarily from Eastern Europe. In the United States, tougher immigration policy became a major and defining political theme in recent years. In India, new immigration rules have made it more difficult for certain religious groups to immigrate and gain citizenship. Together, these examples show a real global pattern of countries tightening their borders, not opening them further. What does this tightening immigration environment actually mean for global human resource management? Tougher policies toward legal immigration make it harder for companies to move their best talent freely around the world. This directly makes it more difficult to pursue what earlier lectures called a fully geocentric staffing policy, meaning hiring the best person for each job regardless of the nationality and moving them whenever they're needed. Some of the real gains from matching top talent to the best possible role may simply be lost. As a result, some international businesses may find themselves shifting back toward a more polycentric approach, relying more heavily on local talent in each country instead. Another likely response is that firms will invest more heavily directly inside certain foreign subsidiaries, especially bringing the work to the talent rather than trying to bring the talent to the work. Let's close this module with a very concrete real-world example. Facing tighter restrictions on work visas for engineering talent coming from India, several American technology companies have chosen to invest more heavily in their Indian operations directly, treating this as a substitute for bringing those same workers to the United States. At the same time, there's anecdotal evidence that Canada, which has a more welcoming immigration stance, is attracting more of this global talent instead. Companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, both of which depend heavily on high technology engineering talent from around the world, have expanded their operations in Canada rather than trying to bring that same talent into the United States. This is a powerful current example of how shifts in national immigration policy ripple directly into corporate location and staffing decisions. Let's summarize what we have covered today. Global companies increasingly rely on consistent global compensation strategies, as we saw in detail with the McDonald's. Expatriate pay usually follows the balance sheet approach, aiming to keep compatriots' standard of living equal to what they had at home, plus a premium for accepting the assignment. A diverse workforce is clearly linked to stronger financial performance, supported by strong evidence from McKinsey and by Sodexo's detailed real-world diversity program. Organized labor has real concerns about multinational companies, including the threat of relocation, the splitting of skilled and unskilled work, and the importing of foreign labor practices through unions have had limited success organizing across borders to countries counter this. I'm sorry. Finally, rising economic nationalism and tighter immigration policy are actively reshaping how companies manage global talent right now, pushing some firms back toward more local staffing and more distributed global investment. That brings us the end of today's lecture on global human resource management. Thank you for participation, and I will see you in the next lecture.